What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So the Samsung Galaxy A22 5G is the cheapest 5G capable smartphone available from Samsung this year. And in a lot of ways, this device kind of reminds me of the fantastic A-series phones of years past. Great features, great value, truly bang for your buck devices. However, it's obvious this time around that I guess adding the 5G distinction also meant having to compromise in a couple other areas, which keeps this phone from being an absolute must-buy in my opinion. Which is also why, as you guys know, I prefer the A22 4G instead this year. And you can check out my full review on that phone if you want. I hate to be too picky though. The A22 5G is a great phone, and if you're thinking about it, there's no real reason not to buy it, but considering there's also the 4G model, and the A32 and an A42, I think you'll find that relatively small price jumps with those phones will yield some big returns on features and specs. It really just depends on what you value, but in the end, makes the couple compromises on this phone a little harder to ignore. Let's start with the basics. Price-wise, like I said, there's nothing more affordable than this if you're looking specifically for a 5G Samsung phone. This A22 5G retails for around $280, depending on where in the world you're located. And it's not a device that's available in every region, but if you're interested, I'll leave some links down below in the video description to where you can get this phone at its cheapest current price. Physically, the A22 5G, for whatever reason, is pretty different from the rest of the A-series lineup this year. It may not be totally obvious at first. From the front, it is actually mostly the same. You've got a big 6.6-inch display. There's the familiar teardrop notch for the selfie camera, larger bottom chin, about an 82% screen-to-body ratio, which all in all is in line with most other A-series and budget devices. So I can't complain much about how the front looks. It's a bulkier, beefier phone in the hand with those extra borders, but not totally unmanageable. Around back, Samsung went with a completely different fit and finish compared to really anything else they've released before, which is just bizarre. This phone has a similar matte plastic rear cover to other A-series and even S-series phones, but it's smoother, it's shinier, it has almost a metallic finish with a chrome Samsung logo towards the bottom. The camera module is outlined with a polished edge as well, and the frame of the phone, which feels metal-like, is a color-matching matte finish. Now to me, this is the best looking A-series phone in the lineup this year. It looks more premium than even the A52 or A72, so I really like it. It's just very strange how this phone wound up looking so different. Taking a look around, you'll actually find all the physical traits you'd want. There's expandable storage via an SD card or the option for dual SIM support, so that's nice to see. The side-mounted fingerprint sensor is here too. It's really solid, it's fast, it's accurate. I haven't had any issues, and I prefer this over an in-display reader on these budget phones anyway. Towards the bottom, the headphone jack is still there as well, alongside the USB-C port. Just the one single speaker on this phone. You don't get dual speakers until you jump all the way up to the A52, but honestly, the out loud listening experience is still pretty decent. So the overall framework for a solid smartphone is all here to start, but let's now jump into what I consider to be the first sort of compromise with the A22 5G, and that's going to be the display. Now, a couple of years ago, you could get an OLED screen on Samsung's A20 series, which was one of the things that made it such a good value. This year, the A22 4G gets an AMOLED panel, which is great, but this A22 5G is stuck with Samsung's TFT display, basically LCD. That's a little disappointing to see. And overall, the screen looks mostly fine, but it's just going to be noticeably duller, less colorful, and less bright compared to the likes of an OLED panel. It barely peaks at about 385 nits, and no HDR support either. On the flip side, it's at least a full 2400 by 1080 resolution, so there's no worries on clarity or sharpness. A screen this big should be 1080p in my opinion. And it is also a 90Hz screen as well, so it has that fast, fluid, and ultra-responsive feel that has become a must-have addition to the smartphones I use, and it's something I think most other people will notice and appreciate too when they interact with this thing. So it gets 2 out of 3 things right, I suppose, but I just always am going to prefer an OLED display now. And actually, this is a prime example of the strange inconsistencies Samsung has with the various displays across their A-series lineup this year. The 2 different A22s are different, the A32s are different, the the A42 is different as well. It makes choosing a smartphone really hard, and I'll say that if the overall viewing experience is most important, the A22 4G and A32 4G are better screens at a similar price point to this. Inside, the A22 5G I think is actually well spec'd. It's powered by the MediaTek Dimensity 700 5G chipset. The choice of either 4, 6, or 8 gigs of RAM depending on what you buy. Mine here has 6, which I've always found to be a good balance for overall performance, gaming, and app management. And like I mentioned earlier, you can also toss in an SD card, which is super helpful. Here are the Geekbench scores for those of you who care about that. Now I know some people had hoped for something more inside this phone, but I think this choice of processor is just right. It's a relatively new chipset, it's benchmarked quite well, it needs to be 5G capable anyway, and I know it's technically the lowest option from MediaTek in this kind of space, but considering the factors I mentioned, I don't think you can expect too much more. It all boils down to real-world performance after all, and I'm happy to say that this phone hasn't had much in the way of performance issues, if any at all, at least with how I use this phone. Now, I should mention that the UI experience you get here is Samsung's One UI Core, but you guys know that I don't make a big fuss about that. There's nothing for me that's missing. Jumping between your average everyday apps, this phone is going to be smooth and responsive, thanks in part to its high refresh rate display, which offers an artificial boost in speed, but also the RAM and processor keeping up with everything too. Apps stay relatively current with 6 gigs of RAM, launch and load times are good. When we jump into some gaming, again, I found this phone to perform really well for what it is. And I know in previous years, I think there was sort of an upper limit in what the low-end A-series phones could be able to handle. Now, that limit doesn't seem to exist anymore, and I haven't found anything that this phone has trouble with or generally can't do. If you wanted to buy this phone just to play games, I don't think you would be disappointed at all with any titles, and that's not something I could always say about low-end A-series phones. Nowadays, performance just isn't as much of a factor. The larger than average phone also packs a big battery inside as well, 5,000 milliamps. And with this, there's a couple factors that may impact your battery life. For me, I've found that I can comfortably get some 18 hours of screen on time, and a bit more than that with 90 Hz disabled, though the difference I found isn't all that drastic. That'll likely equate to 2 days of actual phone usage without needing a charge, so that's nice. The downside is that with 15 watt charging speeds being the max on this phone, that big battery takes well beyond 2 hours to fully charge from 0%. Fast charging has never really been a focus from Samsung on these budget phones, and that trend continues. Fortunately though, I don't think you'll have to rely on that charger too much anyway. Finally, let's go over the camera capabilities. Now this is another area where I think some compromises were made, both in hardware and real-world picture results, but there's still enough to be happy about. Spec-wise, this phone has a 48 megapixel main lens, a 5 megapixel ultra-wide, and 2 megapixel depth sensor. You might notice not only is there one less lens compared to the A22 4G, but the wide angle is also a little worse here too. On top of that, the selfie camera is just an 8 megapixel shooter. Again, not nearly as good as its 4G counterpart, and generally just not as good of a spec regardless. Fortunately, the camera app offers a well-rounded selection of shooting modes that used to not be included on some budget A-series phones. Everything from night mode to manual controls, slow-mo, and hyperlapse. There's even the strange 2K video recording option as well. No doubt plenty of effort has been put into offering better camera setups on budget A-series phones. In practice, this phone actually takes a pretty good looking shot most times. You'll find it to be very colorful for sure, that's what Samsung does. I think outdoors in particular, these pictures look really great. The wide angle is nice, but like always, it often gives you a darker, dimmer, duller looking image compared to the standard lens. Night mode can be hit or miss. Sometimes it works really well and gives you the right result with brightening up the image and preserving quality. Other times it just totally misses the mark, and that's normal for these budget phones. The selfie camera leaves a bit to be desired. It's not bad, but it's a bit lifeless and void of detail. Again, just not as good as the A22 4G. Overall, there's no doubt been a lot of improvement with budget camera tech, and this is a prime example of that. I just think you're still sort of at the mercy of your scene or subject. Not every picture will turn out great. And like I said, comparatively to the A22 4G, there's definitely a little less here. So with the A22 5G, I sort of boil it down to a couple of things. Price-wise, this phone is your entry-level 5G smartphone from Samsung, and that's great. Sub $300 is a deal no matter how you analyze this phone. The display not being OLED is a compromise, and the camera capabilities are a bit lacking at times in the results and with the hardware too. But everything else about this phone I found to be really good overall. I think in the end, there's just so many A-series phones to choose from now with such slight random differences that you just need to figure out what's most important to you. If you don't care about 5G, the A22 4G or A32 4G are both, in my opinion, better options than this phone. But if 5G is what you're after specifically, this might just be the way to go. The next best option for 5G, skipping over the awful A32 5G, is likely going to be the A42 5G, and that's going to be more of a price jump by comparison. But what do you guys think? Where does this phone stack up in the A-series lineup? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.